Good morning. My name is Peter Pham, and I'm the director of the Africa Center here at the Atlantic Council. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here this morning for this preview of the historic U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. Before introducing our distinguished speaker, to whom we're deeply grateful for making the time to set the scene for us, permit me to say a word about the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. The Atlantic Council's Africa Center was established in 2009 with a mission to transform U.S. and European policy approaches to Africa by emphasizing the building of strong geopolitical partnerships with African states and strengthening economic growth and prosperity on the continent. The center seeks to engage and inform both policymakers and the general public on the strategic importance of Africa, both globally and for American and European interests in particular, through programs and publications, as well as a robust media presence. Within the context of the Atlantic Council's work to promote constructive U.S. leadership and engagement in international affairs, based on the central role of the Atlantic community in meeting international challenges, the Africa Center supports and collaborates with the public and private sectors in forging practical solutions to the challenges and opportunities in Africa. It's in the spirit of this mandate that I'm delighted that we're able to host this particular event on the eve of the historic summit during which President Obama will welcome leaders from across the African continent to Washington. The summit, the largest event any U.S. president has ever held with African heads of state and government, builds on the president's trip to Africa in the summer of 2013 and is aimed at strengthening ties between the United States and one of the world's most dynamic and fastest growing regions. According to the White House, the meeting will advance the administration's focus on trade and investment in Africa and highlight America's commitment to Africa's security, its democratic development, and its people. Goals very closely align with those for which the Atlantic Council's Africa Center itself was created, and thus why we here at the Atlantic Council very much support this initiative and why we're organizing more than a dozen events around the summit in the hope of contributing in some way to a success that will be a win for the United States, a win for African countries and Africa as a whole, and a win for the wider Atlantic community of which Africa is very much a part. We're very delighted and honored today to have Linda Thomas-Greenfield as our speaker to help set the scene and preview the summit for us. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield was sworn in as Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of African Affairs on August 6, 2013. Linda, what a one-year anniversary celebration you have planned. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield came to her current position from more than a 3-decade-long career in the Foreign Service, including foreign postings in Switzerland at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations, Pakistan, Kenya, the Gambia, Nigeria, and Jamaica. Her Washington postings include the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration from 2004 to 2006, and the Bureau of African Affairs, where she served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary from 2006 to 2008. From 2008 to 2012, she served as America's ambassador to Liberia, where she participated in the rebuilding of that country that now gives the lie to the title of my book written a decade ago, Liberia, Portrait of a Failed State. Returning home from Monrovia, she served as Director General of the Foreign Service and Director of Human Resources, leading the team of approximately 400 men and women who handle the full range of personnel functions for the State Department's 70,000 strong workforce. And if Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield will permit me, let me quote what I thought was one of the most momentous lines in the testimony she gave to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last year at her confirmation hearing. She said, for far too many years, we've been Africa's partners in times of adversity. While we'll continue to support African people in the moments of crisis, we will now also be Africa's partner in times of prosperity. Imagine Africa not as the hopeless continent, Pache the economist, but as a partner in prosperity. And note the theme of the upcoming summit, investing in Africa's future. So for helping shift that narrative, one which we all hope the upcoming summit builds even greater momentum for, thank you. And so without further ado, please welcome the Honorable Linda Thomas-Greenfield.
Wow. Well, I hadn't thought about the fact that August 6th was the anniversary of my start in the Africa Bureau. So it is going to be a momentous day of celebration for me for 1 year in the Bureau. Let me just tell you how delighted I am to be here with all of you today. We're on edge in the Africa Bureau. We're by next week this time, we will all be able to exhale. We are all holding our breaths as we get ready for the onslaught that has already started. Some of the leaders have actually already arrived in Washington. We will see more arriving tomorrow, and then over the weekend, we'll see the vast majority of them coming into town. And I know the African ambassadors are feeling the same kind of anxiety that I'm feeling as we're preparing for this, because we know that this is going to be a momentous week of Africa in Washington, D.C. And I don't think that Washington will have ever experienced a week like what we are going to go through next week. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of trepidation. And for any of you who have to commute in by road, I know that it's going to be a difficult time, and I apologize in advance for any bad experiences you might have on the road. But you can imagine that we're going to have 51 heads of state and other leaders from across Africa in motorcades driving around the city with streets closed. And you might, I encourage you to look at the articles in the newspaper that will be showing you which streets will be closed. But next Monday, President Obama will welcome those 51 heads of state and governments to the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. The summit will take place over a 3-day period, and it's the first such event of this kind, and the largest, as Peter noted, largest event any U.S. president has ever held with African leaders. It is unprecedented. It's an unprecedented opportunity to strengthen U.S. ties with Africa and to highlight our commitment to addressing issues that affect us collectively. We have two main objectives. We want African leaders, African citizens, and Americans to come away with the clear message that the United States cares about the continent of Africa and that we're committed to an enduring, multifaceted partnership. We also want to see the summit lead to increased American investment to the continent and to more direct linkages between U.S. and American companies. And we know that if that happens, it's going to have a multiplier effect. It's going to create jobs on the African continent, and it's going to create jobs in the United States. As you've heard, this is not going to be a typical conference. At the explicit instructions of the president, it's designed to be interactive and conversational. And I know you're all saying, well, what does that mean? And we were all saying, what does that mean? How are we going to explain that to our very formal African counterparts? This interactive and conversational. And the African ambassadors who are here know that we had a difficult time explaining to them exactly what that meant. But I think we all got it now, right? I think we're close to being there. So we've been working closely for months to set the agenda with our partners on the African continent. We work closely with the Washington-based ambassadors, with the private sector, with interagency stakeholders and representatives of civil society on the summit. I was in Malabo a few weeks ago, and we had a record 34 bilateral meetings over the period of the summit. And I have to tell you, there was tremendous excitement, tremendous enthusiasm in every single meeting I had. And truthfully, most people got what we meant about an informal dialogue and wanting to have a dialogue and a conversation with the president. This participatory format will reflect a multi-layered, long-term partnership that characterizes the U.S. relationship with Africa. Perhaps as an even bigger demonstration of the depth and diversity of U.S. interests in Africa, as was mentioned, we're currently tracking an incredible number of side events. At last count, it was 80. These are going to be hosted by many of you who are here in the room. It's going to be hosted by businesses, it's non-governmental organizations and think tanks and diaspora groups, and you name it. And initially, we were a little nervous as we thought about all the African leaders arriving in Washington with their delegations of ministers and advisors. And we're going to have a summit in which most of those ministers and advisors wouldn't be in the room because it's a summit of heads of state. And we were trying to figure out what they would do. And we were hinting to many of you that maybe you want to think about hosting something and inviting some of these ministers. I don't think we ever imagined the number of events that would be spurned from this. And we're excited about it. We're excited to be a catalyst for all the activity that will take place around the summit and the discussions that will take place and the interests that will come out of your hosting all of the meetings that you'll be working to carry out during the summit. This participation clearly shows that it's not just the United States government that cares about Africa, but it also shows that the American people care about Africa. But more importantly, it will show the American people the potential, the opportunity, the excitement that exists on the continent of Africa. I know that many of you in the room, again, are playing a major role in all of these events, and I want to personally thank you for your time and energy that you've invested in helping us make this Week of Africa next week in Washington a success. Some critics have suggested that a regional summit like this minimizes the importance of bilateral relationships. I disagree with that. Bilateral ties are the bedrock of U.S. foreign policy. And we have more embassies in Africa, in African capitals, than any country in the world. I have to remind people every single day that this is not a renewal of our relationship with Africa. It is not a new relationship with Africa. It is not a reflection of us determining that somehow we've been out of the game for many years. This is building on what is a strong historical relationship with the continent of Africa. This is precisely why Secretary Kerry has been pushing for all of our ambassadors who have not been confirmed, and we're hopeful and prayerful that that will happen over the next day so that our ambassadors can get out and really continue to build on that relationship and all those embassies that we have overseas. 25% of our embassies are not staffed at the moment by ambassadors. We've had 8 countries in which they've not had ambassadors since 2013. So we're very, very hopeful as well that having all these heads of state come to town will encourage our colleagues on the Hill to move forward on moving these ambassadors out so that they can be in place to continue to nurture the relationships that we have on the continent. And many of them are assigned to countries where we have issues right now. We currently do not have an ambassador in Sierra Leone, where we're dealing with a major crisis. We do not have an ambassador in Cameroon. We do not have an ambassador in Niger. So this is an important time to show that strong commitment by getting our ambassadors out. Today, many of our highest priorities are regional and global in scope. There are transnational threats like violent extremism, climate change, health threats, trafficking of arms and narcotics and people, wildlife trafficking, economic insecurity, to name a few, that have no regard for national borders or are too big for one nation to resolve. So just as we work bilaterally with African countries, we're also working with them regionally and multilaterally. That is why the United States is so deeply engaged with the African Union, and why the chairperson of the African Union and several other senior officials will be here at the summit next week. We know the United States is not the only country looking to partner with African nations on a regional bilateral basis. The suggestion that the U.S. and African Leaders Summit is a reaction in some way to other summits, other events that some other countries have held, really does overlook our 5 solid decades of collaboration and cooperation with Africa. Ambassador Rice stated clearly yesterday, and I hope that many of you heard her speech yesterday at USIP. She stated, "The United States does not see Africa as a pipeline to extract vital resources nor a funnel for charity," unquote. We're not threatened by the presence of other nations in Africa. Rather, we encourage our African partners to determine what relationships, whether transactional or enduring, will be the most benefit to them and their people. There's a whole lot to be done on the African continent, and none of us can do it all. So we encourage others to be active on the continent of Africa, but we encourage Africans to be conscious of how those relationships impact their people. As I said earlier, we hope to see increased U.S. investment as one of the summit's outcomes. When we talk about the fact that most of the world's fastest growing economies are in sub-Saharan Africa, we're also seeing a burgeoning middle class of African consumers, an expanded market for U.S. direct investment, and this means enormous growth opportunities for American businesses and again, new jobs for Americans at home as well as for Africans. Since 2000, the African Growth and Opportunity Act has played a fundamental role in our efforts to build sustainable, inclusive economic growth in Africa and promote opportunities for U.S. companies. President Obama has made clear that his administration will seek a seamless renewal of AGOA, and we have been working closely with our colleagues in the Hill in pursuit of this goal. It is up to Congress to decide when and how long AGOA will be extended, but what is important is that both sides of the aisle support Africa and they support AGOA. So we're looking forward to the AGOA Ministerial, which will take place on Monday, August 4th, as a chance to celebrate AGOA's success and to reflect a way to modernize and strengthen the program so that it can have broader impact on the continent. Also on Monday, as you know, we will be doing some additional things. We will host on Monday evening some small group dinners. These will be hosted by Bloomberg Philanthropy, associated with the Department of Commerce. And these dinners will be for American CEOs, African heads of state and government, and they will be held across the city. So again, if you don't need to be in Washington on Monday evening, and I think many of you will be because there are a lot of other activities that are taking place, but we're going to be hosting these dinners across town. And they're arranged to give these individuals a chance to discuss what is needed on both sides to move our economic and investment cooperation forward. On August 5th, the Department of Commerce and Bloomberg Philanthropies will co-host the U.S.-Africa Business Forum at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. There will be approximately 300 participants from U.S. and American companies, as well as African heads of state and ministers, U.S. government agencies, as well as members of Congress. And this has gotten extraordinary attention. I don't think a day goes by that I don't get an email from at least 2 or 3 people saying, can you get me an invitation into the business forum? But what has happened, because this business forum is so small, so many other trade events have been added to the agenda of the heads of state that are trade events between companies and individual African governments. And those are things that we, again, support and we think will contribute to the success of the business forum. Representatives will attend from many sectors, including power and energy and infrastructure, finance, capital investment, information communication, technologies, consumer goods, as well as agriculture. And participation, unfortunately, is going to be limited for this. But again, these other events, I think, will be added opportunities for investments. As Ambassador Rice mentioned yesterday, we deliberately focused the summit beyond the crisis of the moment to envision the future we want and how we can work together to achieve critical goals over the next 10 to 15 years from now. On Wednesday, August 6th, President Obama will host three leaders' sessions at the Department of State. The first session, Investing in Africa's Future, will be both an opening plenary and a discussion of inclusive, sustainable development and economic growth. I expect the discussion to draw from conversations that took place during the preceding 2 days of the AGOA Ministerial, the Business Forum, the Power Africa event that will be hosted by the Corporate Council, and as well civil society events that are taking place on the 4th. Let me say a word about Power Africa. As you know, this is the initiative President Obama launched last summer to increase electricity generation capacity in sub-Saharan Africa to 10,000 megawatts. The initial Power Africa countries are Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Nigeria, and Tanzania. Power Africa, however, represents a new model for development. It is about leveraging private sector investment to meet generation and access goals. So it's not just a U.S. government program, but it has broad investment opportunities connected to it. 12 U.S. government agencies and other public and private sector partners are deploying development assistance, financing, diplomatic tools to accelerate dozens of energy transactions. Over the next 5 years, the United States will commit more than $7 billion in financial support so that we can attract more private investment in Africa's energy sector. So this is not about overnight solutions or one-off deals, but it's about long-term collaborative efforts between us and the continent. Regional and peace and regional stability is the theme for the second session of the summit. This session will focus on shared concerns and potential new ways to work together to find long-term solutions to regional security and peacekeeping challenges on the continent. Many African countries are facing significant threats from violent groups exploiting socioeconomic challenges, as well as local grievances, ethnic group tensions, weak institutions, porous borders. The United States supports African efforts to improve security at the sub-regional, at the national, and at the continental level, with the clear understanding that our partners in Africa are in the lead. So we work in cooperation with them in the African Union and across other security sectors, and with their police and with their law enforcement, their justice system, and their armed forces to support peace and security efforts on the continent. So how are we cooperating? Let me give you just a few examples. Since 2005, we've trained over 250,000 African peacekeepers in 25 countries through our Africa Contingency Operations Training and Assistance Program that you know of as ACOTA. We're working to counter extremism in the Sahel region through the Trans-Saharan Counterterrorism Partnership in the West and in the Partnership for Regional East African Counterterrorism in the East. We are supporting the African Union-led missions in Somalia, and we supported the African Union-led missions in Mali, Central African Republic, before they transitioned to Blue Helmet UN operations. In these instances, we're not imposing American solutions, but rather we're helping build capacity to build resilience and partnerships that address instabilities, complex root causes, and not just in the most troubling manifestations. We're looking at how we can prepare before the troubling manifestations happen. On Wednesday, the last conversation with the leaders will be on governing for the next generation. This discussion will allow us to highlight areas where African governments are registering progress. It is also an opportunity for candid exchanges about how we might deepen our partnership to tackle obstacles to development and the full achievement of fundamental rights. The discussion will focus on strengthening public institutions, civil society, rule of law, and opportunities for youth while tackling the billions lost in revenue due to illicit finance and corruption. These are not the only topics that will be addressed in the summit's official agenda. The U.S. government will host 6 official side events that we're calling signature events so that they can be distinguished from the 80 private side events that are taking place. And we hope that this will bring together certain U.S. and African leaders, officials, members of the African and U.S. private sector, and the diaspora. These signature events are designed to deepen the awareness of some of the critical issues facing the continent and to foster collaboration on ways to work together to resolve some of these problems. These are, and you may have seen these announced, honoring the contributions of the faith community. That will take place tomorrow. There's a civil society forum on Monday, investing in women for peace and prosperity, also on Monday, investing in health and resilience, food security in a changing climate, and combating wildlife trafficking. All of these will take place on Monday. Unfortunately, we don't have time to give the details of all of these events, but you can check the White House website or our website to get additional information. I will tell you a little bit more about civil society forum on Monday morning. 600 representatives of government, civil society, diaspora groups, private sector, philanthropic community will gather for a series of sessions and a town hall meeting hosted by Secretary Kerry. The event will demonstrate the importance of leveraging the knowledge, the experience, the resources of citizens in civil society and safeguarding civic space. And finally, before I conclude, as you know, we've had 500 extraordinary young people in Washington over the past 3 days. The 500 young African leaders, they have been extraordinarily inspiring. If you have had the opportunity to meet them, I know you would agree with me. If you've not had the opportunity to meet with them, for those who still remain in town, I encourage you to meet them. They are the first cohort of a newly renamed Mandela Washington Fellowship of the Young African Leaders Initiative. This is President Obama's signature initiative for engaging with youth in Africa. If the continent is to realize its potential for economic growth, African youth must be engaged. If it fails and this growth is not achieved, the continent will have the largest unemployed youth population on the earth. Millions of youth will not be invested in the future of their nations or communities. Millions will live with the potential of being attracted to extremist ideologies or criminal activities because they have no positive opportunities. So this is what YALI is about. The summit's overarching theme of investing in the next generation builds on that fact. Africa, just like the United States, we need dedicated young people to become leaders in all aspects of society, in schools, in business, in civil society, and government. There was some mumbling that this is about preparing youth to take over in political positions for African leaders, and it's not about that. It's about preparing youth to be positive contributors to their nations in the future. We had young people who were working in business sectors such as recycling in Liberia. We had young people who were working in agriculture. We have young people who are in public service, who are already working in government. We have young people who are working in civil society, in communities, building capacity for women, providing young girls opportunities for education. So this is about the future. And the future is not always all about politics. It's about economic development. It's about investing in businesses and entrepreneurship, and some 36 of the young people got grants to help them with their business from the Africa Development Foundation. So it's a great opportunity for young people to build their capacity to lead in whatever sectors they show leadership in the future. So again, as the president said on Monday morning in his YALI townhouse meeting, and I'll quote, and I'll end there, "Even as we deal with crises and challenges in other parts of the world that often dominate our headlines, even as we acknowledge the real hardships that so many Africans face every day, we have to make sure that we're seizing the extraordinary potential of today's Africa, which is the youngest and fastest growing of the continents," unquote. So in conclusion, please keep us in your thoughts and prayers as we move forward. We're very much energized as we approach the coming days, and I know that it's going to be a successful and a productive week of Africa in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. Oops, I don't have my watch. I have time for a few questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield, for that. And before going on, just acknowledge a few of our distinguished guests here. I'm very honored, our Vice Chair and one of Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield's distinguished predecessors, Ambassador George Moose.
And boss.
And Ambassador Michael Battle, former U.S. Ambassador to the African Union, and who's worked very hard on this summit. And thank you also for honoring presence, their excellencies, the ambassadors of the Gabonese Republic and of Burkina Faso. Because of Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield's limited time, she has a White House meeting, I would ask that you keep your questions 2 questions and keep them concise, and then we can get as many in as possible. And please wait for the microphones and identify yourself when you do so. So if we start over here with, yeah.
Hi, Doug Brooks, consultant on stability operations. The Africa Union has really been moving forward in terms of taking the lead on these stability operations. I wonder at the summit, specifically, what are you going to be discussing, and how is that going to be raised?
That certainly is going to be an issue of discussion at the summit, and as I mentioned earlier, the head of the African Union will be in town and will be participating in all elements of the summit, because we do want to be we want to make sure that their priorities are our priorities and not impose our priorities on them. So we're working very, very closely with the African Union. It's not a summit of the U.S. and the African Union, but at the same time, the African Union is an important player on peace and security in the region. And so for that reason, both the president of the African Union, President Aziz, will be speaking, and the chairman of the African Union, Lamini Zuma, will be participating.
The gentleman here in the front row.
Femi Akimbi, I'm with Manchester Trade. My question, with this renewed relationship with the African continent, any new ideas floating around, i.e. a one-rail system from Cape to Cairo?
What kind of system?
A railroad, one African railroad from Cape to Cairo.
I like that idea. Let me disagree with the first part of your question. It's not a renewed relationship. It's not a new relationship. It is building on what is already a strong relationship and making that relationship stronger. This idea that it's renewing the relationship indicates that there may have been problems, and the relationship is a strong relationship. But we do want, relationships need to change. They need to take into account what is happening in the world that's different from what was happening 50 years ago. So we are working with African governments to look for new ideas. Now, a railroad from the Cape to Cairo is not one of those new ideas that we have on the plate, but we are looking at infrastructure, because we know if companies are to succeed in investing on the continent, they have to have reliable infrastructure. And that's what Power Africa is about. And if we can make Power Africa work across the continent of Africa, we're going to see some major infrastructure and other developments that will cross borders.
Over here.
Ambassador Chris Lyons, coming in this morning, I was listening to the Diane Rehm show. It was all about the Ebola outbreak and the announcement by the 2 presidents that they're not going to come to the summit next week. And the other part was bemoaning that the Ebola outbreak is not on the summit agenda next week. Just wondered if any kind of reaction to that.
Before the Ebola outbreak became this big press thing this week, it was on the agenda for the summit. So every subject, we have a lot of side meetings that we are organizing, and one of those meetings that we planned to do was with the 3 heads of state, with HHS and CDC, so that we can have an in-depth conversation with them on how we might better assist them and hear from them directly what kind of assistance they need. We still plan to have that meeting. I didn't hear on the news that they had announced that they were not coming, although I did know that. I have spoken to all three heads of state since yesterday to, again, get from them where they see things going and what we can do to better assist them. And we'll be discussing that during the summit. We're engaging very closely with them now. We have CDC people on the ground. We're providing technical assistance. We're providing equipment. This is tough. As I mentioned when I came in earlier, we tried to think of all the things that might happen that would interfere with us having a successful conference, and we didn't come up with Ebola. But we're going to have a successful conference in spite of Ebola. We're saddened that President Sirleaf and President Koroma will not join us during the summit. We understand what they're doing and why they had to make the tough decision not to come to Washington, but to stay at home and address this critical problem.
The gentleman right there.
Morning, Madam Secretary. Quick question. The issue of governance has been stressed by
Would you kindly identify yourself, please?
Gilbert Mundela, Congo Diaspora Network.
Okay, and the issue of
Governance
Yes.
has been addressed by the President in different forms. And some as envoys and yourself have pointed out. During this summit, are you going to make sure that is clearly understood by those presidents coming here that the constitutional mandate has to be respected? Second, in regard to investing in Africa, one of the key components, which is Exim Bank, has been in a struggle to stay alive with Congress. It's ironic to see that Ethiopia had to use Exim Bank money from China to buy US planes. Exim Bank, are you going to make a mandate that is going to facilitate Africans to access to Exim Bank to promote businesses in Africa?
Let me address your first question. I think there is no doubt in any leader's mind that good governance is at the top of our priorities for Africa, because without good governance, none of the other stuff works. You don't get the investments, you don't get the confidence that you require. And we have made that clear in all of our public statements. Secretary Kerry was in DRC. He made that a very much a part of our agenda of discussions with the government there. When the president was in Africa, his main point is we need strong institutions, and we do not support changes in constitutions that benefit those who are in power and extend their terms in power. We think a smooth transition is an important component of good governance. It's an important component of democracy, and that is part of our discussion during the summit. On the issue of Exim Bank, that is an issue that's getting a lot of attention in Washington right now, and we're just waiting for the decisions to be made on that. But we do want to be supportive of investments on the continent of Africa. Now, I have to tell you, I don't have a problem with the Ethiopians borrowing money from China to buy things in the United States. We have loaned money to countries, and they've bought things in China. Again, I've been clear. There's a lot of need on the continent of Africa, and African governments need to be able to maneuver between all of their partners to get what is in the best interest of the African people. And if getting loans from another country to make purchases of U.S. products is part of that, we win. It's a win-win for all of us.
Take one from the back, the gentleman back there. Please wait for a microphone.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Michael Davis from Universal Human Rights Network, and I just want to ask, what role will human rights play in the summit? Will there be discussions on human rights in Africa?
Human rights is a major component of our foreign policy, wherever, whatever country we're dealing with. So for our summit in Africa, human rights will be a major part of those discussions. In the third session, we will talk about rights and have discussions on how we can improve the record of human rights on the continent of Africa. I think there's no doubt that that's an agenda for us. It's a priority for the U.S. government. It's a value for us. So no country is going to be surprised by discussions related to human rights. What's your time?
Do you have time?
I have until 10 after. Is that right, Melissa? Yeah.
Okay, the young lady right there. Right there. The young lady.
Yeah.
Hi, Kathleen Mystery, Mystery Enterprises Consulting. I have a question from the other side. As American citizens in the business community, what can we do to help encourage our government leaders to fill the postings overseas? I think it's outrageous and disrespectful that we don't have permanent placements, because that will help. With a good team leader, business can move forward easier.
Yeah. Advocacy. I encouraged even our African ambassadors to advocate for us on the Hill. They have lots of meetings on the Hill. You have lots of meetings on the Hill. So your advocacy is an important voice to add to our voice about getting our ambassadors out to those posts. The 8 ambassadors who've been missing since 2013 is unprecedented. I don't think there's been a time when we've had that long a gap between ambassadors. We're already into the 2014 cycle where ambassadors have not gone out. We're beginning the 2015 cycle right now. So we need to get those people, the 2013 and 2014 people, out of the pipeline and get them out to their posts. It's not a reflection on the great work that our chargés, our DCMs have been doing to carry their missions forward, but that's not the job they were sent out to do. And what that means is if our DCM is chargé, then somebody else is being DCM, and that position is not filled. So it just goes all the way down the line. And I'm finding that in a protocol-conscious world, heads of state want to deal with ambassadors. And they also think that it's a reflection of our relationship with them that we don't have our ambassadors there. So again, add your voice to the hue and cry that we've made on the Hill. Our ambassadors are all apolitical. They're career, they're professionals, and like in the military, where military appointments go forward because they're apolitical, we want our ambassadors to move forward. So thank you. I appreciate your offer of help.
Let's take one from toward the back, the gentleman right there with his hand raised.
There are 3.
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Middle.
Yeah, in the middle there.
Thank you. My name is Jerome. I'm with UNAIDS, and I'm Ugandan, so that makes me African. I just wanted to point to the elephant in the room. I mean, we know that everything we're talking about relies on eliminating HIV and AIDS from the continent, and I was very disheartened that it's not taking center stage, and it might be in one of those side sessions. To what extent does this summit, especially now that the US government is moving forward towards more accountability and sustaining and ownership of the AIDS response by African states, to what extent is this summit going to help that objective, especially in regard to eliminating AIDS by 2030?
One of the great success stories in terms of our partnership with Africa is that we're going to see right now a whole generation of people who are born without the prospects of getting AIDS. Our PEPFAR program has made major contributions to that. None of us expected 20 years ago that we would have that kind of confidence in our AIDS program and that kind of success in dealing with HIV and AIDS on the continent of Africa. So we're very proud of that accomplishment. We continue to work with governments, and I think so many of these governments, seeing that success, are prepared to make this a priority in their governments. And we're prepared to work with them and continue to work with them so that we can accomplish the goals that we've all set out to accomplish. But I think we're well on the way to accomplishing that.
Okay, let's get some from the back. Give the back a chance as well, the gentleman there.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Great presentation. My name is Mvemba Dizolela. I'm a fellow at Hoover and a lecturer at SAIS. Power Africa appears to be a great initiative, but then it bypasses Congo, it bypasses Inga, which is really the heart of energy in Africa. How is that thing possible, that we'll talk about Power Africa and ignore the center of energy in Africa? Thank you.
Well, Power Africa is just that. It's an initiative. And there are 6 countries in this first initiative. And Inga has taken off in terms of it being a priority and being noticed because of Power Africa. And what Power Africa is about is encouraging other countries to do the right things and encouraging companies to work on these issues. So the World Bank is looking very closely at Inga. We have been looking very, very closely at Inga. And as Power Africa takes off, we will be expanding Power Africa, hopefully over many years. Every time I've gone out to the continent, people have asked me, why are we not in Power Africa? How can we get in Power Africa? They see this as a great initiative. So I see this as something that certainly will expand, whether it's part of the U.S. initiative or it's a separate initiative altogether. People now are buying into the idea that power can be, that energy programs can be accomplished and not necessarily through aid. It's through the private sector, and the private sector is actively involved.
The very back row, there, David.
Hi, my name is Hussein Magdi, human rights researcher from Egypt. I want to ask if there are plans to bilaterally engage states with grave human rights violation, and if there are plans to encourage them to open up for civil society and accountability.
Absolutely. My view, and I think this is a view that you all share, that we cannot bypass nations who have human rights problems. We have to engage them. We have to urge them. We have to put pressure on those nations. And so we will have an active, in fact, a proactive engagement with countries who are participating in the summit bilaterally. Both the Secretary as well as other cabinet officials will be having those meetings, and we have a broad range of agenda items on that. But also we engage on human rights all the time. It is not a one-off that we're going to engage with countries on during the summit. This is part of our daily and active engagement with countries around the world.
Moving back to the front, here at the end.
Thank you. I'm Leon Weintraub from the University of Wisconsin. Madam Ambassador, years ago I was a desk officer for a certain African country. At one point, the ambassador of that country came to me and said, you know, you really have to encourage American businesses to invest in our country. I said, Mr. Ambassador, with all due respect, it's my job to alert American businesses to both the opportunities and the risks of investing in your country, considering now that the Soviet Union is no more, there are many more investment opportunities around the world. It's your job to alert them to what those investment opportunities are and to create the environment. What can we do to alert the Africans that will be here next week that encouraging investment is not succumbing to a new form of neocolonialism. It's not becoming a slave to Wall Street. It's not becoming a slave to the capitalists. That if you want to develop your economy and create a bright future, you've got to develop not just simply what the rule of law and civil society, but the whole range of an environment that makes investment a real opportunity.
Thank you for that question. And again, it has not changed since you were a desk officer to the unnamed country that you were the desk officer to. This is the approach to development can't just come from our side. It's also about attracting investment in countries, and governments need to provide the platform. They need to provide the environment that attracts investment, because with 54 countries on the continent, companies are going to go to countries where it's easier to invest. So if investing in one country takes 50 stops to get it done, and lots of what we used to call in Liberia white envelopes being passed, the company is going to go next door to where they can do a one-stop shop, have their company set up in one day, we're talking AGOA here, and not have to worry about paying white envelopes to get dotted lines signed, and move forward in their investment. So the environment is extraordinarily important, and I think the business forum that's taking place on the 5th will provide that opportunity for African governments to say, we're ready to do business, and we're better than our neighbor. So we're looking for competition between African governments for U.S. investment by showing what the investment opportunities are in their country, showing that it's profitable to invest in their countries, and hopefully we're going to see deals signed. And the more deals we see signed, the more countries will understand what is required to get a deal. So it's going to be good. It's unique.
The lady right here. Yes.
Hello, Grace Bayer from the Center for International Policy. I have two questions. One might sound like a broken record, but human rights issues again, but more specific to the LGBTQ community. Will that be on the table for discussion? Because we're having a lot of African leaders, and we know we've been having a lot of issues with that in the continent. And second thing is regarding U.S. foreign assistance, security assistance particularly. Will there be talks of whether moving more towards governance and institutional reforms versus the more operational military exercises that we've been having?
Good. Let me talk about the LGBT issue. Our position on LGBT, whether it's in Africa or anywhere in the world, our views are clear on that. And yes, that subject in the broad discussions about human rights will come up. But I want to be also clear that this is not just an African problem. And that has been one of the most annoying things for me as the Assistant Secretary, to say this is not Africa, it's global, and we have to deal with it in a global way. We keep trying to get that message across. Yes, we do. We saw some very difficult laws passed in Uganda and in Nigeria, and we have engaged with those governments in an extraordinarily proactive way regarding those laws. And we're engaging all over Africa regarding those laws. But again, for me, it's not just Africa, it's global. And we need to address this much more broadly than just as an African problem. And on assistance, foreign assistance, I think we will be looking at the broad range of foreign assistance, not just on the military side, but we did hear in our consultations with African governments that they wanted to talk about peace and security, how they can better build the capacity to respond to security challenges on the continent. It is multifaceted. It is not just the U.S. military that will be involved in that. In fact, the ACOTA training that we've done has exclusively been done through the State Department. Yes, we do bring the military into the training, but a lot of them are contractors that we've hired in the State Department, and they've been very, very successful. I think I can take one more.
One more, okay, right here, Carl.
Hi, I'm Carl Levan from American University, and I want to congratulate the administration for its vision and its ambition in putting together an event like this. And as much as I'd really like to echo the concerns about human rights and security assistance, I'd like to ask you sort of a more general closing question, which is, looking back on diplomatic history, summits have a mixed record. And looking in particular at President Clinton's Summit of the Americas, for example, in retrospect, many people thought maybe this wasn't the best format for us to accomplish the goals that we wanted to accomplish in building ties with South America and so forth. And so you've described a innovative and even risky format for this summit. So can you talk a little bit about what you think the diplomatic community has learned about previous efforts and why you're going to do it better this time?
Let's hope we're doing it better. We're doing it differently. We have the lessons learned from those other summits, not just ours, but the African summits that have taken place across the world. So we're not going to have people giving long plenary speeches, and that was hard to sell because everybody wants their day. They want their day in court to stand and talk about everything they've accomplished. And we've decided that that's not the way we want to do it. We want an interactive dialogue where there's a discussion, a give and take, and outcomes that will reflect commitments made on all sides. So we're not going to deliver a platter of goodies. We're not going to announce, $100 billion in goodies for everyone, but we're looking at what kinds of commitments we can make and we can follow through on, and what kind of commitments African governments can make and follow through on, and how we can have commitments that complement each other, that contribute to the success of our relationship. And just to give you an example, let's just use Yali, because that's one of those areas that we've already been working on. So I don't want to preview things that will come out of the summit, but we have made some concrete commitments to supporting young African youth across the continent. And we've asked governments to come to the summit with their commitments to their youth. And we're going to see how our commitments fit into their commitments. So their commitments might be a commitment to provide universal primary or secondary education to their young people, or to set up a series of training centers, skills training centers around their countries. And we're going to see how we can help them with those commitments. So there will be a lot of follow-up from this conference, and I think it's going to be different. I know it's going to be successful, and I know that 5 years from now, people will still be talking about this historic week in Washington, D.C. and everything that we accomplished during that week. So let me end by thanking all of you for your attention. And again, I look forward to engaging with you during our Week of Africa next week.
Thank you, and please join me.
Good. Thank you.